Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. Now, Simon, today I'd like to talk about an article you recently wrote in the New Daily, and I'll leave a link to it in the show notes. And it was about Australia's shrinking middle class. But importantly, what that means for property investors. I'd like to discuss what it means for business people and entrepreneurs, because people may think, well, hey, this isn't relevant to me. I think our chat today is going to be relevant to probably everyone.
I think so. Middle class and the changes of the middle class, the shrinking middle class, that impacts the whole way society works. That's the complete change of how housing markets works, how retail works. It's a rather big, fat shift that has been sneaking up on us over the last 60 years or so.
Well, in your article, you explained that after World War II, Australia built one of the strongest, one of the most prosperous middle classes in the world. And I don't believe it was luck. It was really the result of some deliberate policies that made housing affordable, education accessible, and jobs secure. But over the past couple of decades, you've mentioned that cracks have appeared. Today, fewer Australians find themselves in the middle, more feel like they're sliding backwards. So, Simon, what's happened? Why is this happening?
This is happening because we stopped proactively building up the middle class. It changed the way that the kind of jobs that are around, because ultimately the middle class is a reflection of your income in relation to what the average person has as an income. But so we then do need to start this conversation with the most difficult of questions here of what the hell is the middle class?
What is the middle class?
Yeah,
Yes.
how could we possibly link this up? And part of this is a certain kind of cultural, social explanation. And there is a more economic explanation. But then we go, well, how do we measure wealth? So clearly the middle class are the people that are not too rich, not too poor, but they are somehow in the middle. And there is no clear number. People always would want to have a number that says like, I earn between $60,000 and $120,000 a year. I'm middle class as a household or something like this. But that doesn't exist because the idea of what you can use your money for, how wealthy you are, is linked to house prices, is linked to the cost of living. And so that's hard to play out. The OECD has a definition of a middle class. They define this based on the relative income to the average of the country. And by that measure, we shrank the middle class from something in the high 60s to something in the mid 50s in percentage terms over the last couple of decades. What I like to do is a bit of a proxy approach. In Australia, we link every job with a skill level, a number from 1 to 5 that indicates how much formal training is needed to do the job. And the best indicator for your income in Australia remains your skill level, remains your level of education. And with this, we see that middle class jobs have completely vanished. They were the biggest cohort in the 60s. They're now pretty much the smallest cohort. The reason why those middle class jobs are still holding reasonably well is that we just didn't train enough tradies. And so now the tradies make really good money, even though based on their level of education, they shouldn't earn as much. Sounds harsh, but so they're now the people that actually did get a trade, they now benefit from the big neglect in the trades. And so they get a premium for the work that they put in. So that is cool for them. But that ultimately still leaves us to this U-shaped society where the middle class is small and we push more and more jobs at the bottom end and more jobs to the top. And then that changes the way that society functions. That changes the way where a business would want to position themselves. Back in the 60s, most businesses just blindly targeted the center of the market. One size fits all. And they go like,
Sorry, if I could interrupt for a sec. The concept was that there was a lot of people in the middle class and a few outliers, the rich and the poor. But now it's the other way around is what you're explaining for those who are listening to this rather than viewing this. So there's a U shape where there aren't many in the middle and there are more at either end.
Absolutely.
Of course, this is not a judge of people. We're not saying that if you're in the poor or the rich, you're better or worse. But it is, I guess, a fact of life, Simon.
Oh, it's just the way that the income spectrum is defined or is structured, and then you'll see that businesses act accordingly. And from a business perspective, it's rather easy in this bell curve environment where everyone is more or less in the center. You blindly target the center of the market. You've hit most customers, and that's fine. It's easy. You just need to kind of understand what the average Australian looks like, and you got your offering sorted. In this U-shaped environment, If you target the center of the market, that's the smallest. It's actually even small and it's shrinking. So you wouldn't target the center then. You would then need to position yourself at, well, either extreme. So from a supermarket perspective, it's hardly a surprise that Aldi emerged, a low income supermarket, a discounter as they're called in Europe. So that makes perfect sense. And then we also saw the emergence of the Leo supermarkets, the fancy supermarkets in the fancy suburbs of Australia, where cost isn't that important to customers. They want rather more quality or something like this. So we see consumer markets adjust to this reality, and society also is impacted by this. Back in this environment when the middle class was so dominant, the middle class had a really important social role. It provided social glue across society. Rich people were mostly a result of the middle class. The poor people had a fighting chance to work themselves up to the middle class. In this U-shaped environment, it's much harder. You're much more likely to get stuck in your rich or in your poor half, and the middle class becomes increasingly less important. It's major changes. So if we go back to your initial comments about we built up the middle class, we did
It
it quite.
wasn't an accident, was it, after the Second World War? It was done
No,
on
because
purpose.
before the Second World War, we want to remember that Australia wasn't a marvelous wonderland where everybody was extremely well off, anything like this. There were lots and lots of people who did really tough, people who lived through the Great Depression. Like, that was a time when Australia really sucked. It wasn't fun to live there. And so then after the end of the Second World War, there was full employment. We built heaps of public housing. So housing was cheap. We gave out cheap loans. We expanded education that was for free. So people went to university for free, which improved their earning capacity. We gave away land and housing for low cost. So you could build up this stability in your life to center your life around this. Also, of course, then after the end of the Second World War, under the baby boomers, we increased the number of household incomes by sending women at the workforce at scale. So all of a sudden, you just had more spending capacities. That created a middle class, just consumer society. You are, of course, right, Michael, that housing was very important in creating this middle class. This was pretty much the foundation of the new middle class, because it enables you stability, and you then become an owner of Australia by owning your small little parcel of land there. And that did create a different mindset of Australia, where the whole country bought into the idea of Australia. Everybody sees their prosperity increase. That's positive. That creates a sense of patriotism, a sense of pride, a sense of belonging. That is really good for social cohesion in a country. And so we lived through this for a little bit, and then things slowly but surely turned around, if you will. Cracks
Well,
appeared.
at that stage, the government helped people into housing after the Second World War. There was a lot more government housing built for returned servicemen, but there was also the new estates for the baby boomers, and housing affordability was almost taken for granted. But gee, things have changed, haven't they?
Yeah, essentially, it's quickly summarized as we saw housing costs go up more than wages went up. And so therefore housing becomes more and more expensive, and that slowly prices some people out of the market. That's quite annoying. All the while, we also shift the way the world of work operates. So full-time employment makes way to part-time, more flexible arrangement, makes way to casual employment, where you don't have all of those employment securities, guarantees anymore. But now we even introduce gig work, which is even less secure and stable. And we push more people into this, and they get locked into these kind of jobs. They can't then get the decent loans for their homes and so forth. So that locks them out of the housing market, which is an entry level to the middle class that keeps eroding this away. All the while, we also increase stuff like childcare costs, education, healthcare. These things are, we charge users for it, so to speak. That means they have less access to actually build up their wealth through their humble home, which pushes some people out of the middle class into the lower class, and the people that are in the upper class, for them, it's really hard actually to burn their wealth because everything continues to work their way, so they can become landlords, and that's what's good on them. And then we see this split emerge in Australia into winners and losers, economically speaking. And so the technical thing that we see is the middle class shrink away bit by bit.
Bit by bit, I think, is the right word. It's chipped away slowly over decades. Now, I'm obviously interested in housing because that's how we help our clients through strategic property and wealth advice. Maybe it's just my perspective, expensive, but it really seems like housing is the center of all this.
I think it is. I think it's an absolutely crucial tool to build wealth or to not build wealth, depending on where you sit there. And it is just quite clearly that becoming a homeowner creates more wealth building opportunities. So homeowners have an economic advantage over renters. That is, of course, in the current environment, and historically it was true since, for many, many decades now. If we were to create a scenario where house prices rapidly fall, this might not be the case. Now, we discussed many a times on this podcast why we both think that house prices aren't going to plummet, that this is a system that wants housing to be expensive, wants them to be high. So why would they fall massively? The current system doesn't suggest to me that we will see house prices fall. That then creates this intergenerational divide into property access, because the families that are rich enough that are asset owning, that have enough capacity to give a bit of a bank of mom and dad loan to their kids, they give their kids a very, very powerful leg up. They provide really well for them, and some people don't have that capacity. And so then that gap widens based on your parents' assets rather than on your own skill and hard work or something like this. Yeah. And so here we go. That slowly continues to erode the middle class.
Now, you mentioned that we've discussed this in shows before. For people who are watching this or listening to this for the first time, if you don't currently subscribe, please just stop for a second, click the subscribe or follow button so you get Simon and my thoughts every week. But we've been doing this show for quite a while now. There's almost 60 shows. They're in the library wherever you're listening to this, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. So on your journey, go back and have a listen to some of the pearls of wisdom that Simon has mentioned, because there's lots of great information there about how demographics is shaping our future. And I guess there is a bit of a theme at the moment over the last little while. We've been talking about how the divide is getting wider, and especially for young Australians. But in your article that I'll leave a link to in the show notes, you identified 3 big forces that you believe are going to shape the middle class going forward.
Yeah.
What were
So
they?
the first one is this looming intergenerational wealth transfer. So we always talk about this, that
Well, that's one of the big topics in a couple of the shows we've done. So again, if you're listening to this, go back and listen to one of the older shows with the wealth
actually, please
tsunami.
do. It is one of my favorite topics because it is so beautifully easy to map out demographically speaking. So we do know when this is occurring. I can't really tell you, because I don't have detailed wealth data, how much wealth we transfer. KPMG and so forth have done big reports about this that suggest 3.6 trillion or whatever it is. It's really a lot of, whatever it
Was
is,
there,
it's a lot
now
of
they're
money.
up to JB Were saying up to $5 trillion over
There
a
you go.
20-year period.
See, even more.
Only because the concept is that the assets for the baby boomers are going to still keep growing over the
Fair
next
enough.
decade.
Absolutely. And so that's the assets that we're talking about. So the baby boomer generation is the richest generation, and they hold a lot of assets, homes and so forth. And as they die, they will give this wealth to someone. And these tend to be their millennial kids. And these kids tend to inherit the money at a bit of a silly point in the life cycle, late 50s, early 60s. You don't really need money then. You tend to need money when you need a family home in your piece, not 2 decades after this or 3 decades after this. But so you give heaps of money to the millennials. But of course, not every millennial will, share this wealth transfer. Some millennials will earn much or inherit much more money than others, and some won't inherit anything. And so that then further intensifies the divide into rich and poor based on the amount of assets that you can inherit. Because housing has gotten more expensive over time, and this effect always happened. We always, through inheritances, made society go further apart. But the more wealth, the more worth the asset is, the bigger the impact of this wealth transfer becomes. And so, yeah, we'll see this speed up over the next 2 decades. Very, very big impact there. Another thing that we talk about when we say about the big forces that shape the middle class is migration, population growth, and how this puts more and more pressure on infrastructure, on housing, on really everything. And so you say, well, fair enough. So we put more people into the cities. That means, again, house prices go up. Who is going to live where? Well, we'll push the poorer people further out to the outskirts of town where a bit of new land is available at the cheaper housing, and the richer people, they live closer to the more desirable beaches and employment centers. And that ultimately further leads us to segregate our cities into rich and poor, so that you will increasingly have less and less contact with people that are richer or poorer than you are. And that also then just changes the reality of a worldview that we have. If we are
Yes.
not opposed to the views of low income earners as high income earners, we can't claim to understand what's going on. And the other way around as well, but that's probably less dramatic, so to speak, that dynamic. And we need to be at the very least aware of this. If you think about this in your lives, where do you meet people that are significantly richer or significantly poorer than you are? Most people are roughly
Yes.
in your area of wealth. I think we're not better off for it. I think we ultimately want to understand perspectives and worldviews and conceptions of what Australia looks and feels like from as many perspectives as possible. And economically speaking, we tend to be rather limited these days
I would
in our
think
view.
social media would actually accentuate this, Simon, because once you start looking at certain sorts of commentary about how unfair things are, how difficult things are, you go down the rabbit hole of those things. And so that's all you tend to see, where that's how a lot of people get their worldview. So this would probably be more accentuated at the moment.
Absolutely, because social media and online created so many different new news channels, and we also consume material that is exclusively catered towards us. So we don't even share the same cultural language. If there was still only one or two TV channels, we at least would watch the same stuff, and then we would have a shared language about values, what we think is cool, what we think is not cool, based on, these few limited shows and movies that are being shown to us. We now have rich people watch a certain thing, poor people watch a certain thing. I'm sure that there is actually pretty limited overlap in what people watch based on their socioeconomic standings. The one exception would be sports. Sports
Yes.
so far is consumed by the rich and the poor, and therefore the social importance that sports has, the social glue that it provides in Australia, I think tends to be underestimated. This is one of the most important social forces that we have in Australia is sports. Loving and hating the same athletes, same sports teams is very, very powerful in shaping who we are and what we think of when we think of Australia.
That's interesting. So when we talk about the three big forces that you believe are going to shape the middle class moving forward, number one was intergenerational wealth transfer. The second one was migration, our population growth, and the pressure on housing and infrastructure. The third thing you were suggesting was political change, how you see the political landscape moving over the next decades.
Yeah, so I would say that based on your standing in the in this U-shaped, whether you're at the top, whether you're at the bottom, whether you feel that the system works for you, whether you feel the system works against you, you will vote accordingly. And so far, we still see the majority of voters are being homeowners or mortgage holders, and for them, we could say the system still works, but a growing number of young people, particularly, are renters and for longer, and they feel that the system isn't working for them. And so they then will vote accordingly, which in my reading of the future will lead to even more third party votes, even weaker major parties, which will sooner or later, my focus is about 6 elections from here, lead to a non-Labour or Liberal Prime Minister in Australia, because the two major parties aren't doing themselves any favor in the long term. They continue to weaken their power base. I'm always pointing to the fact that in 1987, less than 2% of us voted for third parties, and at the last election, a third of us voted for third parties in the primary
That's a big
votes.
change. Yes.
And that should continue to escalate over time.
Now, clearly, losing the middle class isn't good for the society. I think we've explained that pretty well at the moment. We've seen what's happened in previous centuries in other countries where they were very rich and very poor, and how it wasn't good. So if you could wave a magic wand and help us rebuild the middle class, what would you do, or how would you advise governments to do this?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things. There's a big housing angle that we can discuss. There's an education angle. I think, and a workforce angle. So from a education perspective, TAFE degrees, which tend to be the entry level to the middle class in Australia, they must be universally free. We must not hinder people to get a TAFE degree by putting a hurdle up front. So I want TAFE to be universally free. absolutely crucial first point. Charge a bit more for university, as far as I'm concerned, to make sure that fewer people go to uni, because at the moment we're over-educating Australia. I want to push a couple of people, not
Wrong
all of them.
education.
Well, exactly. It's the wrong. We talk in education. We talk about this. The highest level of education based in some sort of hierarchical sense. Whether this is good or bad, who cares about it? The idea is we over-educate people. In a sense, we send people to degrees that they don't necessarily need for their jobs. We
Yes,
sent
yes.
54% of our year 12s this year to the university system. That's too much for the kind of economy that we have. And I don't want to halve this number. I want to push 3-4% of those uni people from the university into the TAFE system. Do quite a bit of good for our country. So I would want to see this to improve the middle class. What I would also want to see, will be expensive for the state. I want to see universal free childcare, because at the moment, what is holding the lower income earners back from returning to work, becoming more productive, enabling to increase their family income, is the dumb cost of childcare. For some low income jobs, just looking after the child yourself instead of going into the economy is more affordable, because childcare is very, very expensive. So,
Isn't it? Yes.
and I'm from Germany, where I have young kids now. And when I talk to my German friends and they tell me something like childcare for them costs 80 euros a month, and they
A
complain.
month.
And this is what we would pay per day. So this is quite a remarkable difference here. Yeah. So this is something that should be subsidized. Ultimately, the lower down the income spectrum you are, the more you would benefit from this, which would ultimately help us to strengthen the middle class. So I think that would be important. And then, of course, we look at anything that smells like housing reform. What could we do to make housing more affordable, more plentiful? So build more housing. Offer cheaper housing near transport and jobs, so that people actually don't waste their time commuting and so forth. Easier said than done, because at the moment, building is, especially medium and high density building, is super expensive. So pulling this off as a city I can sit here in my chair and say this easily, but I'm well aware how hard it is.
It will be. What about tax reform? Is that a way of helping?
Yeah, so if I wanted to strengthen the middle class, I would right now heavily look at tax reform. I would look at death tax, inheritance tax, to make sure that while there's wealth transfers occurring, that actually at the moment further intensifies the division into, high income earner, low income earners. If I want to re-strengthen the middle class, I'd better tax the wealth of the baby boomers as they are dying. But that, of course, means I need to introduce this rather sooner than later, because the boomers are already
They
retiring.
won't be around much later.
And so that means there's no point in introducing these reforms in 20 years' time when the boomers died. You need to introduce these things now. But the boomers are such a big cohort of voters that people tend to be very timid in not touching this. It's the same with the superannuation reform, where my reading is maybe a bit too simplistic even of superannuation. But if I go back and I try to understand what superannuation was meant to do, it was meant to ensure that you pay for your own retirement. We put a gun to your head. We say, hey, put 10-12% of your money into this bucket. And then by the end of a working life, you have enough money in the bucket to pay for your own retirement, so that you can guarantee to never ever draw down on the public pension system. But that then, if this is actually the reason why we have a superannuation system, that means there must be a dollar value in your superannuation account. And that means if you have that much money, you definitely won't draw down on the pension. And why should we give you a single tax reduction above this dollar value? That makes no sense. And so, but of course, you also know how this is extremely politically unattractive. And so I go, well, what do we do? If I wanted to make the middle class bigger, I would look at this right now. But I also probably am a realistic politician while I'm doing this. I go like, boy, that's rather challenging at the moment. So
Yes.
I will then be booted out. So what am I doing? What is politically possible, and what would be ideal? And do I actually want to strengthen the middle class? That's something that a political party would also need to answer and have an honest opinion about.
Well, we spoke a lot about property too, Simon, and one of the thoughts would be to get rid of stamp duty if we're looking at people getting into the housing market, or baby boomers, as we've spoken about in previous shows, right-sizing. A stamp duty is a disincentive. It's become a bigger hurdle for people to get property. And as we've said, property creates wealth, and that's what we want people to be able to do.
Yeah. So the idea, of course, would be to, if you just tell people we're killing stamp duty, everyone gets excited. Nobody likes this. But once you kill a tax, you tend to ensure that you collect tax in another way. And the way that you would then collect tax is the wealth tax is a land tax, where you go, I'm taxing you based on the size of the land or on the size of the house, whatever you want to do. And then, of course, quite quickly people go, well, am I being double taxed here? Haven't I paid stamp duty? How do we introduce something like this so that it is fair and equitable, that we do not double tap a code?
Well, the Australian Capital Territory, ACT, has done that over 20 years. But
Exactly.
fully agree with you. It's not fair if I just bought my house last year and paid stamp duty to pay land tax at the higher rate straight away. But it is something that could be brought in over a period of time. The trouble, so land tax and stamp duty are both state-based taxes, but the federal government would be having to come in some ways and help coordinate this. It would be too hard if it was just individual states going their own way, Simon.
And you should never do this as a podcaster or demographer, but you know those big forecasts? At this stage, I'd be surprised if stamp duty survives until the end of the decade. I think we slowly see the tides turning here. We see that this is being more and more discussed. So I would be venturing the guess to say we'll probably see stamp duty phased out, and it could be in whatever way it is. And New South Wales tried it for a little bit, where they said, "Hey, from now on, you get to pick and choose for a new property transaction if you want to pay the stamp duty high cost upfront, or whether you want a small cost throughout the life cycle." And I thought that's a rather smart way of transitioning this in over time. They kind of rolled this back again, which is a shame because I thought it was a really, really smart idea of the Parotake government back then. But so it's gone. I would very much revive this if I was a state premier. I think this will ultimately do my state good. And of course, in this way, you wouldn't have the problem of double dipping for somebody's tax.
Now, I know a lot of people listening to this are property investors. They've got an interest in property because they follow me because of my property leanings. Why should they care about the health of the middle class?
Well, a middle class society has a couple of advantages. The first one, it is very politically stable, and that's very nice. In a society that looks like a letter U, you tend to have very, very large, very dissatisfied groups of people. You can keep them at bay with a lot of police power, with a lot of razor wire around your houses, and you just deal with. In Australia, we're still obsessing about the idea of having and wanting to be middle class because we like the idea that in Australia, your stuff is safe. You are safe. You can move freely around most parts of most cities. That is a big fat privilege that we have. And I would say, as a government, that should be my goal. My goal should be that the country is as safe and easy as possible. And ultimately, it is less important to have that many super rich people in there and rather spread the wealth to a decent middle class. The middle class is also much more flexible to consume stuff like education. So you have on average, a more highly educated population without too many negative outliers, strugglers who are left behind, where you create intergenerational disadvantages and so forth, intergenerational unemployment and so forth. That stuff can be really tough. So yeah, I'm a believer of the middle class. Is there any kind of proof that this is better? I would struggle to find a fair way of measuring this, but I can only declare my belief here.
I'd agree with you. Now, Simon, I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you, but some people are going to be listening to this and wondering, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. I've got a business, an industry, an organization that I'm part of. How can I get Simon to help me? What do you do? How do you help people?
Well, if you think that your business, through a strategic review, that your industry, through a presentation and event, might benefit from being told what your world, your industry, your business looks like through the demographic lens, that's what I do. I come in and I look at your industry data, your business data, and then we try to figure out what it all means and how those very predictable demographic trends, how they might impact your neck of the woods.
Well, I'll leave a link in the show notes so people to get to have a chat with your team to see if you could help them. Similarly, I'll leave a link in the show notes to Metropole, my team who help our clients safely grow into generational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. But Simon, it looks like it's going to be hard to get politicians to change, as you've already said. But if we were having this conversation again in 10 years' time, what would you hope would have changed?
Well, I would want to have seen a somewhat strengthened middle class. I want to have seen us stop the decline of the middle class. Will the middle class celebrate some gigantic comeback? Probably not. Can we slow it down? I think we can. I think there should be a bit more appetite for this. It's a more stable political environment that we're seeing. So I think that if I'm one of the two big parties that should actually see the writing at the wall and see how they're weakened, they must establish a stronger middle class to show that Australia is working for more and more people. So I think there should be a self-interest in it for the political parties that at the moment the actions don't speak that language as well. So that is quite difficult. Um, yeah, but I think that there's increasingly appetite for some major reform. I was quite shocked, if you remember the last federal election, just how little big topics were discussed. These were just two parties just essentially saying nothing all campaign long, rather than providing some gigantic, bold, transformational social outlook for Australia. That's the kind of stuff that I would expect these days, because I would say that the Australian voters are hungry for, they do have an appetite for bold reforms, for big change. That is something that they can very, very much stomach. And there are countries, there are economies where a strong middle class helped you quite quickly. I, of course, as a German, must point to Germany, where you have a big Mittelstand, which is the middle class companies. So you have this gigantic cohort of middle-sized companies providing really strong wages to middle-skilled workers. That's helpful, these kind of things. And you only create this in this more stronger middle-class environment.
Well, let's hope that we can help the middle class grow and feel more secure. And it's not just income, but in opportunities as well. Because if you're at the lower end, you actually don't see opportunities. It's easier to be pessimistic than optimistic, isn't it, Simon?
Absolutely. And in the bottom third of the income spectrum, certain kind of cities stop working for you. Melbourne and Sydney are so expensive to begin with that I could only ever advise low income earners to get the hell out of it, out of those two cities.
Interesting. Yes, that's a good point. So you've made some great insights today. We've talked about how the middle class was built, how it was eroded, but also you gave some insights on how we can rebuild it. So for listeners or viewers, whether you're a homeowner, investor, or renter, I hope you got the point. This isn't just an economic debate. It's about the sort of country we want to live in. And that's the discussions we have in these demographic decoded podcasts each week. We're looking at the trends that are going to shape your future. So if you enjoyed today's show, make sure you subscribe to Demographics Decoded wherever you're watching or listening to this. And please send it to a friend as well. You probably heard about this from somebody, so let them get the benefit from Simon and my chats as well. Simon, I look forward to having a chat with you again next week.
Fantastic.